and weeds and all of that too. So let's start with this outline. I'll just introduce myself briefly in my business and what I do, and also my background, because I think that gives important context to the conversation. I'll talk just very briefly about regenerative versus organic floriculture and how how we deal with IPM for each, and how it's a little bit different. There's going to be an overarching theme of regenerative IPM that I'll go into, and then we're going to talk about putting that into practice by balancing our ecosystems. And then there's some other like quick tips and tricks that I'd like to share. And then we'll end with a final thought about addressing standards for local flowers, because that's totally related to IPM, because it's all related to flower quality and our end product and how bugs and disease affect that. So I own Heirloom Soul Florals. I started my business in 2018, and I am a farmer florist. I'm located in Lockport, which is about 40 minutes north of Buffalo. I actually have 2 farms, which was not my original intention. I was lucky and privileged enough to purchase my own land this year, so I'm moving on to that piece of property, which is photographed on the left here. And that's in Burt, which is a hamlet of Newfane. We're like right under Lake Ontario, directly north of Lockport. And then my other farm is, I'm still there, is on someone else's property. It's actually on a U-pick lavender farm in Cambria called Kinloch Farmstead. And it's a 3/4 acre little plot that I've been growing on, for the past 5 growing seasons. So what I have to say today is mostly experience from this farm that I've been growing on for 5 seasons, because my new farm I don't really have that much experience with yet. So just a little bit about my business. I mostly do weddings. I do both big, like full service setups and a la carte weddings. I sell a lot of flowers wholesale to florists that are local, very local to my region. And I sell dahlia tubers, and I do some workshops. I'm actually retiring bouquet shares next year because I don't actually like doing it. So, we all do different things in our businesses, and I just decided to cut that out. So both of my farms I grow strictly organically with a regenerative focus. I think the least regenerative thing I do is I use landscape fabric. I didn't, on the left, my new farm, I landscape fabriced my whole perennial plot. I didn't want to do that, but I had so much going on that there wasn't any other way I could manage the perennial weed pressure there. So I think it's okay to give ourselves a little bit of grace sometimes. And besides that, though, I would say that everything I do, including IPM, I ask myself before I do it, am I helping or hurting? And that's really a big part of this philosophy here. So my background, just really quick, I have been growing plants and gardening professionally for about 10 years. And I started in Detroit, which is where I'm from, on an urban farming project where we had 9 urban farms throughout the suburbs in the city of Detroit. And I learned how to grow organic vegetables there. And we used a lot of OMRI approved organic insecticides and pesticides to deal with pest pressure. And then my next job, I managed a backyard gardening company in Chicago. We designed, installed, planted, maintained, and harvested vegetable gardens in people's backyards, mostly on the North Shore of Chicago. And because I was the manager of the planting and maintenance team, I've gardened in over like 160 places. So I have a lot of experience with seeing different tiny little ecosystems and different diseases and bugs and soil conditions. And so everything that I'm going to say here, it's all relative to your space. I think Betsy mentioned that quite a lot. It's like everybody's working with a completely different space. My farms are 20 minutes apart and they're totally different from each other in soil profile, in bug profile, in weed profile. So it's really important that we know what we're working with and observe, just constantly be observational. So integrated pest management for an organic system is pretty much just not using chemicals, right? Like, we don't use harsh chemicals and we're allowed to use OMRI approved products. That's pretty much the definition. For a regenerative system, we're by definition, like, the bare minimum is organic. However, we're also working to address plant health through mindful soil regeneration. And we're also working to restore our ecosystem to support native plant and animal species. And by doing that, we're increasing biodiversity and we're building pest resilience, same thing, through biodiversity. So biodiversity, it's a really big topic. It's a big overarching concept, but this is our regenerative IPM toolkit. So biodiversity is all the different kinds of life that we find in one area. It's animals and plants and soil microbes, including bacteria and fungi and all those guys. And all of these species work together in an ecosystem to maintain balance of that ecosystem and to support life. So it's really, biodiversity is the crux of life on Earth. It's the key to sustaining life on Earth, and it's the key to our balanced ecosystems. Hello? Okay, sorry. I get really easily distracted, so sorry if so when the biodiversity of our ecosystem is out of balance, problems arise in the form of unhealthy plants, unhealthy soil, disease, bug infestations, etc. So I choose to address the problem by asking myself, what is it that I can add into this system? Like, what is missing from the system? As opposed to, what can we eliminate or kill from it? And Betsy used the term macro and micro in her presentation in a different way. I'm also saying that we need to address biodiversity at the macro and micro levels. And that means the micro, and this is just me saying this. This isn't like something I found, this is just, I'm breaking it out into macro and micro so that it's easier for me to explain the whole concept. So the micro level is our soil microbiology, which includes the beneficial bacteria, fungi, and company. That's what I like to call them. And when our soil microbiology is balanced and diverse, our plants are healthy. Bugs do not eat healthy plants. First part. The macro level is things we can see more, like insects and animals and plants. And when our flora and fauna are balanced and diverse, they work in concert as nature intended, and they keep each other in check. So the main goals of our using, biodiversity as our regenerative IPM toolkit are: one, we want to increase our plant health first. And we do that by increasing the soil health at the micro level by using mindful soil regeneration practices. And our second goal is to attract and house many different species of plants and insects to help set the stage for nature to take care of herself. And that, I would refer to that as ecosystem restoration. And the result is, we as farmers, after doing this, it might take a few seasons, we will have little to no intervention at all in dealing with insect pests in particular. And that can also trickle down into, not having to deal with diseases either. That all sounds like a beautiful fantasy fairy world, but it's the world that I'm in. Like, I really don't have a lot of pest pressure on my farm. my first farm, and I think it's due to a variety of things. I think that I have very healthy plants, so the bugs really aren't eating them, and that's because I've focused a lot on soil health. And then I've also, I think, done a pretty good job of harnessing, like attracting a lot of things to the farm so that they keep themselves in check. And that's the whole concept of this biodiversity that I'm going to talk about. So let's look at regenerative IPM in terms of increasing our biodiversity through soil regeneration. So we're starting on that micro level first. The very bottom line is bugs do not eat healthy plants. They can't digest them, or it tastes bad to them. I'm not a biologist. I have a background in architecture, so this really isn't my background. But what I've come to understand from reading a lot of books and listening to other people who know more than I do is that they only eat plants that are injured or sick and already in a state of decomposition. So by simply increasing the health of our plants, we'll naturally repel bugs. And to do this, we need to improve our soil health first. I think that this is the first line of defense against both insect pests and disease. So I'm not going to go through all of this because this is a totally different topic. These are regenerative soil practices that I actually do all of these things on both of my farms, and this is a whole separate topic. But I think because I'm, presenting this concept that we really need to improve our soil health in order to improve our plant health, that it would important for me to list all of these things. So, it might not make sense if you don't do any of these things. It doesn't make sense for you to just go feel like you have to do all of them at once. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of planning and time to be able to do these things. Some of them cost money, some of them don't. It's just, you really have to figure out what works best for you and your business. But again, always, before you do anything, ask yourself, am I helping or hurting in relation to the biodiversity of the ecosystem on my farm? So to go along with this list of soil regeneration practices, which I guess, so if you were to pick any one of these things to start doing, I don't know why I put cease use of chemicals and synthetic fertilizers on the bottom, but I would say that would probably be the first thing you'd want to do, is just stop using that stuff. And then soil testing is also very important to address mineral and nutrient deficiencies, because if you have a mineral or nutrient deficiency in your soil, your plants are going to be unhealthy to begin with. Soil testing is also great to monitor your improvement through the seasons, in terms of, nutrients. Some of them also measure microbiology and soil organic matter and all of that stuff. And then I would also try to not till as often. I would also say that is incredibly important. And then all the rest of these things kind of go along with that. I wanted to leave this list of books that I have read a lot of books on farming, regenerative farming. These here are ones that I refer to constantly. I've read some of them multiple times. I go back to them in the winter to reread and remind myself. They're really beautiful resources. There's also this video here by Andrew Mefford that's amazing on no-till farming. And there's these 2 podcasts that are also incredible. So the first thing, soil microbiology, we have to improve our soils in order to improve plant health so that we have, natural resistance to disease and bugs. That's a very big overarching topic, but it's important to understand because if we don't have healthy plants, the bugs are going to eat them. That's just what happens. So let's take a look at increasing biodiversity by restoring our farm ecosystems, which is more of a macro level. In terms of plants, animals, and insects. Sorry, I have some like, okay, we're here. I forgot to put a picture on this slide. Good job, Fran. So I'm going to read this. Harnessing the natural native ecosystem, starting by planting a wide variety of native plants, will begin to restore balance to the system. So most of us, you know, probably all of us, we're working on land that's been damaged in some way. Our ecosystems are somehow imbalanced, and it's our job as earth tenders to try to rebalance those systems. So a wide variety of plants, particularly native species, will attract a wide variety of bugs, which will attract a wide variety of predatory bugs and animals. And that natural balance system will eventually take over. It might take a couple seasons. It might take more than a couple seasons. But eventually the insects and the animals will end up duking it out on their own. Now, it's not perfect. There's always going to be somebody who is doing something that you don't want them to do. But in general, this has been my experience that the more open and welcoming my farm is for, you know, as many insects and creatures as want to be there, they tend to balance themselves out. So pest pressure can be greatly minimized over time by simply adding more of the right things to the system. So we're going to talk about in 4 ways how we can do that. The first thing is that we need to adjust our mindset and expectations of pests. The second thing is we need to, well, I'm suggesting that you cease use of chemicals entirely. The third thing is that we should be creating habitat for native insects and birds by planting native perennials. And the fourth way, it's not really a way, I'm just going to list a bunch of different ways that you can attract birds and other predators outside of planting perennials, native perennials. So adjusting our mindset and expectations is super, super important, because the whole reason, well, we're too stressed out to begin with, and I think, you know, we chose to do one of the most stressful jobs that we could ever choose. And I think giving ourselves some grace and that we can't solve everything and that we need nature's help is kind of relieving. So we need to reframe the idea of what pests are, because all bugs serve a purpose in the food web. Like, someone is someone else's food, and if we completely remove that one that we don't want, the other one doesn't have food. So, you know, Betsy said this like a bunch of times, that it's really important that you educate yourself on the bugs that are present. So I'm not saying like, oh, all of a sudden we don't care about bugs, we're not going to worry about them, blah, blah, blah. I think, you know, we still need to know who we're working with. We should still observe and even keep a journal or a record, and even schedule into our calendars maybe once a month, like a walkthrough of everything, so we can be very aware of what we have, because it also helps to track our progress so that we can see like who's showing up that was never here before. So changing our mindset and expectations, like this might sound crazy, but my point of view is just like, everybody's welcome. Unless you're a vole or a deer or a groundhog, you are welcome. I hate those 3, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. So the second thing that I'm not here to judge anybody. If you use products, it's totally fine. And that's, if it works for your business, that's great. I don't. So I would suggest that you cease use of chemicals entirely, even OMRI approved products, because chemicals are designed to kill, and they kill more just than what they're advertised for, even if it's an organic approved product, because there's always some chemical, even if it's derived from a plant, that is harmful to a lot of things, and not necessarily just what it says it'll kill. It's a broad spectrum. So everything suffers from chemical application, including soil biology, beneficial microbes that are present on the plants. So, there's tons of beneficial bacteria and fungi that live on the stems and leaves of our plants that are battling the bad bacteria and viruses. And if we're spraying stuff and we're causing an imbalance of the good guys. So also bees, pollinators, and also animals can be affected by these products. So again, I come from a background of using a lot of products in a preventive manner, including all of these neem oil, insecticidal soaps, BTs, hort oils, DE. I used to use a lot of diatomaceous earth because that's the environment that I was working in, and that's what we did. But I kind of just decided to not do that anymore, and instead try to use nature, just embracing nature's system and using that instead. And it's actually really worked for me. Now, I think, if you are somebody who uses a lot of chemicals and you go cold turkey on the chemicals, you might have a hard time. I don't have experience with this, but I have a feeling that the bugs might go a little nuts, or, something, the balance might get really uneven and it might take a little while to get through it. But that's also where the mindset and expectations come from. Like, you have to understand that everything is here, everything serves a purpose. So I think if we just start maybe removing some of the most harmful chemicals from the fields, then that's at least a start. Really good start. The third thing we can do to balance our ecosystem is to plant native perennials, which is fun. I love talking about this because it's plants. So something that I learned from this absolutely fabulous book that I listed on the bottom, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy, is that plants that are native to our region provide habitat for an enormously diverse amount of native insects. So for instance, native solidago, I learned this in this book, support over 300 types of native caterpillars, which blows my mind. That's just so amazing to me. Compared to a non-native privet, this is just an example of a non-native shrub that supports next to 0 native insects. So the reason why that's important is because I think Betsy had mentioned something to keep birds away. I actually embrace birds because they eat bugs. And I think that we can really use them as, a really beautiful partner in farming. So, if you're growing berries for a living, that would not be great. But, flowers, they're not really, I've never had a bird eat a flowering plant. So it's not a concern of mine. So where there's a wide, diverse variety of native plants, there's a wide, diverse variety of native insects. The birds here only eat native insects. So if we have a bunch of shrubs and plants that are not native, they're not attracting the native insects, which means the birds are not going to create habitat in these plants at our farm. So, all of us have tons of plants that we plant that are not native. We're cut flower farmers. We plant tons of hybridized non-native plants, and that's totally fine. I'm just suggesting that we incorporate as many native perennials into our fields as we can to attract all these different species of insects and birds. So some ways that we can incorporate native perennials on our farm, some of them are obvious, like you can plant rows of them within your farm for cuts. I have on the next slide a list of my favorite native perennials for cut flowers and a list of my favorite shrubs for hedgerows. So I'll show you those in a second, but you can plant entire rows of this. Like I have this picture of Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly milkweed. I have a lot of space, so this might not work for some people, but I choose to overplant butterfly milkweed because one, it is actually one of the top selling crops on my farm, believe it or not. I have people that go nuts over it. 2, I want to make sure that there's enough for me, but also enough for monarch larvae and pollinators that want to enjoy the flowers, so I don't have to worry about overcutting. And C, because it works, milkweed works as a trap crop for aphids. So Betsy had mentioned trap crops before. Milkweed is my favorite trap crop because aphids are the only milkweed is the only plant in my whole farm where I will find aphids. And I have it in several sections on my first farm. I grow like 4 different varieties, and I grow it with the understanding that it's going to get aphids on it. Like, I let that go. But I love this butterfly milkweed so much that I overplanted it at the new farm so that that wouldn't entirely happen to this planting. So anyway, I got off a little bit here. So plant rows within your farm, whatever. Plant rows of shrubs within the cut flowers. So I'm saying by that, I mean, if you have a bunch of rows of, production, I'm saying every couple rows, plant a whole row of shrubs, if that works for the way you deal with soil, the way you weed, whatever, or if you can make it work that way. Because what happens is the shrubs will grow up during the growing season, and they provide a perfect perching place for birds. So you're basically inviting birds into the middle of your field, as opposed to just having them, on the edges with hedgerows and things like that. Large hedgerows of native shrubs. And I suggest, planting several layers of those. And by that, I mean things that are at different heights. Maybe they blossom at different times of the year. They produce different types of fruits, so that you're really providing like permanent habitat for birds. And you're attracting, all the bugs that the birds like to eat as well. You could also, I plan on doing this at my new farm, planting a whole separate area with a native meadow pollinator thing that never gets cut. It's just for the wildlife. And then if you have like open areas, I know we're all working with different size properties, but if you do have an open area, you should consider planting native trees to support birds and bats. And when they grow up really big, then you're supporting those really much bigger species of birds as well. This last idea here, I thought of this and I have not actually done this, but the idea of using native species as cover crops. So you just buy a bunch of native seed and use it as a cover crop, and maybe in conjunction with our normal cover crops that we love to use. All of them are like non-native. And so I was just thinking, if we tried to incorporate native cover crops, that might actually support soil biology in a different way. So this is my list of favorite native perennials for cut flowers, and also native shrubs for hedgerows. This list is not exhaustive. There are so many more, but these are my favorites. So I would say everything on this hedgerow list actually also makes a beautiful cut, either for flowers or foliage, except maybe elderberry. But when you grow elderberry, you get those beautiful elderberry flowers and the berries, and you can enjoy them in a totally different way, and the birds love them too. So other ways that we can attract birds and predatory insects beyond plant diversity, beyond planting native perennials, is to always provide a water source for birds, frogs, and snakes. So sometimes it's as simple as just like, I'll fill up my wheelbarrow before I leave, like full of water. And you have to keep on it and, keep dumping it out or whatever. But I've also considered finding some like vintage bird baths, because I think they would be cute, and I love complicating things. So, can also be beautiful and enjoyable. We should consider adding housing to fence posts and T-posts. So my new farm, I had a really nice fence installed with the wood posts, and I plan on putting birdhouses on like every other one around the whole perimeter. That might be excessive, but like maybe a couple on each side, so the birds are actually living in there. So overhead watering is also, a topic of, you could go either way with it. A lot of farmers overhead water and they have a fine experience, and then other people overhead water and like Betsy said, they have diseases and all of that. I actually overhead watered my whole dahlia patch this year because I didn't have enough time to set up my drip irrigation like I normally would. So it's actually worked out great for me. And overhead watering attracts birds to the flower field because they like to bathe in it and fly around in it. But it also repels spider mites because spider mites hate wetness. They like hot, dry conditions. So if your foliage is wet, they're just gonna get right out of there. So, I think I actually might go forward again with overhead watering next year, see how it goes. I have a feeling it's gonna be great. And it's a lot easier than setting up drip every year. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Allowing tall grasses to grow on your property will house grasshoppers. So, allowing parts of your property, if you have the space, allowing it to grow wild and just keeping a buffer zone mowed around your production area will help keep those guys over there. And then the mowed area will hopefully deter voles and, those ground creatures just from like coming right on in. I also use rock piles to house ground beetles. I have a picture of this in a couple slides, so we'll talk about that then. And then again, I'm going to reiterate, no and low till practices support habitat for ground beetles, spiders, snakes, toads, frogs, all these creatures that live down in the ground. If you're not disturbing the soil constantly, they'll feel comfortable and they will stay and they will help you in this battle against the bad bugs. So some kind of quick tips and tricks that I have for IPM. This lovely photo was my farm last year after a massacre of voles. Voles and I are not friends. I absolutely loathe them. They came in last winter. We had really heavy snow cover, and I had basically set up like a 5-star hotel for them. Like I had landscape fabric down. I had mulched everything with 3 inches of shredded leaves. Like I don't till. I put a fence around the field so like no like predators could get in, no like cats or foxes or anything. So they were just, happy as clams in here and basically destroyed half my farm. They ate my entire fall planted crop of flowers, thousands of flowers, and also a bunch of perennials that I had planted that fall because the roots were tender and they just had a field day. So I've got some things to say about voles. But first, let's start on the left-hand side, the insects. So this is just beyond what I was talking about with planting native perennials and that whole creating an ecosystem with native perennials. There's also other things we can do. We can interplant umbellifers, which are those carrot flowering kind of flowers with the tiny little floret discs on top. Predatory wasps love those kind of flowers. So dill, cilantro, fennel, and sweet alyssum. If you have the space, I have a lot of space, so I'm considering planting a whole bed in the middle of my farm dedicated to these plants. And I might even just like let them go to seed, every year and just let them keep coming back and doing their thing. So I don't have to keep, planting it and dealing with it. I have also had experience underplanting tomatoes with sweet alyssum. And sweet alyssum is another one of those crops. I think Betsy said they attract hoverflies and other predatory insects on this slide. So on the bottom left, sweet alyssum, I would guess that that's maybe like 2 or 3 plants, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's probably 6 plants. But what I'm trying to say is it takes a really small amount of plants to spread out and create this beautiful carpet. So not only are you attracting these predatory animals, but by putting sweet alyssum at the base of taller crops, we have a really nice living mulch. So it's keeping weeds down, it's keeping moisture in. And if you're a wedding florist, sweet alyssum is beautiful for boutonnieres and flower crowns, just saying. So I think I'm actually gonna consider planting a few of my rows of dahlias with an underplanting of sweet alyssum. And I would do that simply by scattering seeds. I've done this before in vegetable gardens. So I know that like it's very easy to just scatter alyssum seeds. You don't even have to cover them. You could start the plants, but I prefer to just like do it in the field. So, you know, we could do that with dahlias, sunflowers, maybe even zinnias, amaranths, any, you know, big tall crops, where there's bare soil, where you're not using landscape fabric. So, also planting perennial grasses can host larvae of ground beetles. They might also host larvae of Japanese beetles. So, you know, just be aware of that. But I believe that if we have, you know, perennial grass plantings, that it'll host, you know, several types and they'll just go at it and deal with each other. That's just been kind of my experience and how I approach it. So, and when I say perennial grasses, I don't even necessarily mean natives. You know, it could be anything. And then we talked about trap crops a little bit. Betsy talked about trap crops quite a lot. My favorite is milkweed to attract aphids. So also, I have an invasive grapevine growing on a telephone pole, like right next to my other farm. And it acted as a trap crop for Japanese beetles pretty much every year. This past year, I had like no Japanese beetle pressure. I don't know if that was everybody or if it was just, if I was the only lucky one. But for some reason, I had no Japanese beetles in my entire farm this year. But in previous years, the Japanese beetles would mostly flock to that invasive grapevine, and they wouldn't touch my other flowers. I'm not saying plant invasive grapevine. That's not a good idea. But if you already have it, maybe just like don't entirely remove it. Just cut it back a little bit and let it do its thing. I've also used arugula as a trap crop in vegetable gardens. So I've planted it kind of in the same manner as I did sweet alyssum, where I seeded it underneath larger crop like eggplant. And aphids and other like flea beetles and pests would be like super attracted to the arugula, and they would leave the more valuable crop alone. So I feel like it could serve a possible use in flower farms. Why not? I think it's worth a try. And really, and you know, a philosophy, part of the philosophy of regenerative agriculture is that the soil is always planted. So the more the soil is planted, the more photosynthesis is being generated and that carbon being put back into the soil. So, you know, underplantings are great in general. And I would also say, as a final thing here, like if something's just getting eaten and eaten year after year after year and there's nothing you can do, then just get rid of it. Just say goodbye. Just, I've done this with asparagus because I love growing the asparagus fern, but the asparagus beetle was just too much for me. You have to remove the debris to get, you know, the asparagus beetle lives in the debris at the base of the plants over winter. And I don't farm like that. I actually purposely leave most of the debris when I'm like all the debris when I'm harvesting, when I'm stripping the leaves in the field. And if a plant isn't diseased, I will leave you know, the small parts of it, maybe not a huge thick stem, but I leave all of it in the field. It never leaves because it's like providing that nutrition, whatever the plant took out of the soil, and it's holding it, it's holding it in its leaves and stem. And if you leave it there, you're essentially giving it back, kind of like how the forest works, right? With the leaves, we don't remove the leaves from an old growth forest. It nourishes itself. So that's kind of how I farm, and it doesn't, the Spurious beetle and I don't get along. So I just had to get rid of that crop. And also Echinacea, I ended up getting rid of because the Japanese beetles one year just kept decimating it. And I was like, you know what, this is dumb. So I didn't have a lot of space at that time to give up for that. Otherwise, I might have just kept it as a trap crop. But I really wanted to use that real estate for something else at the time. So I said, you know what, let's just get rid of this. Sometimes you just got to move on to something else. So I planted digitalis in its space. So now that's just an area that's being, you know, every 2 years replaced by digitalis, foxglove. So let's talk about voles. I don't like voles. We have a very bad history with each other. And I've heard from other people that the number one best defense against a vole is a cat, or perhaps even a dog that eats them. But I don't have animals on either of my farms. I'd like to get cats at my new one, but I just don't have I don't live there. That's the thing. So I'm worried about them all winter, and I don't have the infrastructure for it yet. So because I don't have an animal to take care of this animal issue, the second best defense is a combination or all of the following. I've literally done all of these things except one of them. So the most important thing to do is to remove your landscape fabric and thick mulches over winter. The thick mulches kills me because, again, I'm the type of farmer that leaves all of that purposely because I don't want the soil exposed and I don't want the little microbes exposed over the winter. But voles love to live in it. So it's really important that if you do have vole pressure, you got to remove it. We can trap them, which is a lot of work, and I don't enjoy dealing with dead voles. But it, you know, is like a way to pick them off one by one. This soaking the soil with castor oil is something that I just learned from, there's a link to a video here by an elderly gentleman who has owned a hosta farm in New Hampshire for like 40 years. And he had a terrible vole issue, and he goes through this like 18-minute long video of how he soaked his soil in castor oil. You basically water the soil with like a mix of castor oil and soap and water, and it repels them. Like they won't make a home in soil that has it in there, which I find fascinating. So I just did that to my farm. So we'll see how it goes, but I recommend watching that video. I've also heard from several farmers, and Nigel Palmer talks about this. Nigel Palmer is, he wrote this book. Sorry, this is ridiculous. The Regenerative Grower's Guide to Garden Amendments. He's actually like a engineer. He's some sort of like space engineer guy who just got really into like regenerative growing and making his own biological amendments. It's absolutely fascinating, and I recommend, if you are not familiar with him, to look him up on YouTube and to maybe get this book out of the library. He says that mixing crushed shells, like oyster shells or crab shells, into your soil actually works to get rid of voles because it's like gritty, and it, like, I don't know if it hurts them, and they just don't like it when they're tunneling through. And I've heard people who have done this, it actually works. So I plan on buying this stuff in bulk. I'm sure it can be found somewhere on the internet, and adding it to my annual beds that will not have landscape fabric on them. Using cayenne pepper is highly effective. It repels all animals, but again, it's something that you have to reapply.
And I think we might have lost your sound. Can anyone else hear? Or?
It came back.
Okay, great.
You can hear me now?
We can hear you. Okay.
Bobcat pee, cool.
So hear about the bobcat pee.
You gotta hear about it. It works. So this food container. So I made this because I was just really frustrated over having to like always spray urine because it's disgusting and it's also gets to be expensive. It's time consuming. It washes away in the rain, but when it sticks around, it works. So I decided, you know, I'm going to figure out how to like make this stick around. So I bought some Tupperware from the dollar store and I poked holes in the top of it. Like there's a hole here. There's a hole on each side right under the lip of this so that rain wouldn't get in. And I put the urine in it and I put it like every 4 feet down my Lisianthus row because I was terrified that the voles were going to eat the Lisianthus, and they didn't eat the Lisianthus. So I don't know what combination of all these things that I've been doing, but I'm kind of like, I just pull out all the stops when it comes to voles. I just don't take chances. But this is an effective way to keep urine in the farm without it like washing away. I mean, this lasted in here for like months, and I put a rock on top of it so that it wouldn't blow away. And then for planting tulips, I just planted tulips at the new farm, and I literally dug my trench and lined the whole thing with hardware cloth, 1/2-inch hardware cloth, planted the tulips, and then I covered the whole thing with another piece of hardware cloth. This is how paranoid I am. Because they have to be physically kept out. They have to physically be kept out. So I would not recommend using chicken wire if you're interested in doing that, because they can actually get through a 1-inch chicken wire hole. I would not take my chances. I would spend the money and get the hardware cloth. In the future, next year, I plan on building some wooden raised beds. Dahlia Mayflower Farm in Canada actually has she does this, wooden raised beds with the hardware cloth stapled to the bottom of it. And I would go as far as to staple the top of it as well, because again, I'm afraid. So, you know, keeping them out of like tulips, they need a physical barrier. I was also thinking of like mixing the tulip bulbs all up with cayenne powder, but I just like felt like a hard cloth barrier would be more effective. Deer. The only way to keep deer out is to put a fence up. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to you, but I've been through this before. And so I've done 2 types of fences. My new farm, I paid a fence contractor to put up like a professional agricultural 8-foot fixed knot mesh fence. Okay. Because I plan on being there a long time, it's really exposed to the elements. And I thought the amount of money and time I'm going to spend erecting my own fence and the repairs, because I know I'm going to mess it up, like it just wasn't worth it. So I paid someone to do that one. My old farm, my husband and I put up a fence from deerbusters.com, and it's like one of those plastic Benner fencing. I'm sorry, I didn't put a picture of it here, but if you go to deerbusters.com, that's what my fence looks like. It's like a plastic mesh fence, and it has these you know, black poles that go into a metal footing that you just use a sledgehammer to like bust into the ground. There's no holes that need to be dug. It's very easy to put up. It's very effective. It keeps them out. If you need a deer fence and you decide that, you know, Deer Busters is the way you want to go, I would this is my one piece of advice. I would purchase the mesh that is the thickest, that is the most expensive, because I think I did the middle one. I probably did the basic one. They claim it's supposed to last 10 to 15 years. No. It whips around and will like break and stuff, but the thicker one is at least twice, if not 3 times as thick. And I would say that it's definitely worth spending the money. So deerbusters.com is definitely a good resource. Groundhogs. Good question. When I worked in Detroit at the Urban Farming Project, we had groundhogs on like 4 of our farms. We trapped and moved them, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. So I did not tell you to do that. I don't do that on my property because I don't have groundhogs. So I hope I don't get them. If anybody has advice dealing with groundhogs besides building like really tall wooden raised beds that aren't practical for us, please share in the chat because I would love to know as well. So I kind of talked about this stuff. The bottom is a picture of cayenne powder that I used a couple weeks ago on digitalis foxglove, believe it or not, which nobody except voles like to eat, but it had all this lush greenery and I was all worried about them eating it. So I covered it with cayenne. It rained a couple times and it looked like I was just curious to see like what happened to it after the rain, and it actually kind of still stayed a little bit on the leaves. It like turned into a light sandy color, and this is gross, but I like tasted a little bit of it and it was still hot, but not as hot. So I think, you know, voles eat roots and they eat green stuff. So the castor oil, the soak of the castor oil with the water, that's good for roots. I would still be concerned about them eating the leaves. And this is only if you have like serious vole pressure like I do. So for that, I decided to deal with it using cayenne powder. You can buy it in bulk at like webstaurantstore.com, or I'm sure other websites, but I like Webstaurant Store. And then this picture on the right are the pictures of my little rock piles. So I have really rocky soil at this new farm. So I'm starting to make these little bug houses at the end of my rows, and it's probably, you know, going to be really annoying to mow. I'm probably going to have to go up and down this with a string trimmer and I'm going to hate myself. But when I move the rocks, like ground beetles and things like scatter out of it. So something as simple as this creates habitat for predatory insects. So that's what I have to say about IPM, like holistic IPM. You know, we're talking about biodiversity on a grand scale. How do we harness the way nature works? How do we, you know, recreate nature's natural ecosystems on our farms, you know, by improving soil health so that we can improve plant health. And then on the other side, creating habitat and attracting all these predators and attracting everybody on the farm so that they can all take care of themselves so that we really don't have to do much. And part of that is also dealing with our own mindset of like not freaking out when we see bad bugs. We have to be okay with them, you know, and just trust the process. So much of this is trusting the process. To go along with that, you know, the whole reason we care about IPM is because we need to have a beautiful product in the end, right? We can't sell flowers that are crap, that have been eaten, and foliage that has a bunch of holes in it. But I think it's really important for us that we start asking ourselves, like, what is the standard for local flowers that are grown sustainably? You know, we're choosing, people like me, and I'm sure a lot of you are choosing to do things in a more mindful way. And we're not using pesticides. We're not killing the bugs. The bugs are going to eat the plants. So how do we change the mindset, or not change, but how do we just have an open conversation about, you know, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in the local flower market in terms of quality. So, you know, we should be questioning as cut flower growers, as an industry, like how much damage is okay for our locally and sustainably grown product? Do we have any leeway with this? And why must the flowers be totally perfect and uniform, like their flown in counterparts in the globalized, you know, industrial flower market? Why should we, not that we shouldn't be held to the same standard, but I just feel like that market grows in a completely different climate they grow in a different climate, but like they grow in a completely different way. They're using chemicals that are banned here. Like it's beyond. So of course there's not going to be any damage, you know, bug damage on those flowers. Surprisingly enough, there's a lot of disease if you get flowers from a local wholesaler. It's like pretty bad sometimes. But what I want to know is, why can't we just change this mindset, which allows a bit of forgiveness in the field? So for instance, these two photos, this one, I mean, this peaches and cream dahlia here on the top has a couple markings on it. And I would be perfectly okay with using that in my own work, even wedding work, retail work. That wouldn't faze me at all. There's a couple florists that I have that I would feel okay selling that to, because I've had this conversation with them. And I don't sit there and say, oh, I don't know about this or that or whatever. Like, they respect what I do, and they buy. I have at least one person who buys from me partially because of my philosophy, my growing philosophy. Like, people actually appreciate what we do. And this picture on the left is of a bridal bouquet that I made, and that Cosmo, that Cupcakes blush Cosmo in the front, has like a huge hole in it. It's got like 2 huge bug holes in it. And then, but I put it like forefront in this bridal bouquet. I never got any complaint. Like, I was confident that that was a beautiful flower. I'm not ashamed of that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I saw the professional photos, and it was like zoomed in on this like flower that has like holes in it, and nobody complained. I got nothing but happiness from these people. So I think that sometimes we might be freaking ourselves out for no reason, or we're not, because the, you know, standard's too high. So I think we need to achieve this by having open and honest conversations with our florists. Like, I would say, you know, to somebody that, you know, I grow in a completely organic, regenerative way, which means I don't use chemicals. Bugs eat our plants, and I'm not killing the bugs, and they need something to eat. So they're probably going to eat some of the plants, and some of my foliage sometimes has like bug holes in it. And I actually think like that wild look you're going for, it kind of works, you know, in a way where the bug holes make it look a little more wild. That's my like inner manipulator coming out when I say those kind of things. But I think it's really important for us to just be honest with people. And, you know, I say this to my wedding couples, and I talk about it on social media as well, because once we talk about it and, you know, we start saying all these things about all these great things that we're doing, but sometimes the flowers have holes, it's okay. The flowers are still beautiful. I think that it might make our jobs a little easier, and it might, you know, ease off of the pressure that we have to like get rid of all these bugs and all of this. So I just think we need to start talking to our customers more. If you feel comfortable with that, I can talk to pretty much anybody about it, and I'm not uncomfortable, because I'm confident that I have a very beautiful product, even if there's a few holes in it. And it's also important to note that like we can't be selling people crap. You know, I'm not saying go sell people crap. Like, don't sell anything to anybody that you wouldn't use in your own work. You know, we still have to vet the bad flowers. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up in the conversation because it's related to all of this. So I hope that well, does anybody have any questions? I hope that, you took something from this and were able to come up with ways, we're able to fit it into your, growing situation.
I think you're getting some great compliments there in the chat about how a lot of growers agree with you that this is really
cool. I actually haven't looked at the
you
chat.
should be going, and it's going to be an effort to really educate the public and the florists. And I know when I first started out, I was worried about every flower and everything had to be perfect, and I rejected so many that were fine. And then it is a matter of letting go, I think.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard at first, but
but I guess it comes with experience like you've had, that you sell them and it's okay. They're beloved. And
yeah. And I don't know, it works for me. It might not work for everybody. Like everybody's level of anxiety is different over different things, but it's just like, it's also when we're able to let things go, we help ourselves out because our jobs are so hard already.
Absolutely.
So I actually didn't look at the chat at all when I was doing this. So I don't know if Carla, if you want me to just look through it and address.
Yeah, why don't you scroll through? And I mean, a lot of stuff people were just giving their own insights. If you want to.
Oh, okay, great. I love that. I'd love to hear what people have
to say. This is great.
Cool. So let's see. Sorry, there's a lot here. Thanks for all the comments, everyone. Okay, so Jenny said, I use plain cardboard as weed block. What is your thoughts on that? So I refer to that as sheet mulching. I am a huge fan of sheet mulching. It's a really great way to keep weeds, down for if they're annual weeds. The perennial weeds will eventually find their way through, but it's also great because worms love breaking down the cardboard, and it creates like this really beautiful environment underneath it. I usually put like 3 or 4, not 4, that's a lot, 2 or 3 inches of compost on top of it because otherwise it'll blow away. I've also used paper, like builder paper from like a hardware store, and rolled that out on a bed that maybe I felt like the weed pressure was really high, and covered it with compost. That works too. So let's see. Wow, you got 2,000.
I was thinking of 23 acres of cardboard though.
Yeah. Oh, 23. Wow, that's a lot. I mean, I don't think I could do that on 23 acres. I could do that on a couple rows, maybe. Yeah, that's a lot of work, but God bless you. So, okay. I see somebody wrote, I meant to mention this. We got approximately 2,000 native shrubs and trees from our conservation district. This keeps disappearing. Sorry. Every time somebody says something, it disappears. And we will get more in the spring. Yeah, so I actually get a lot of my hedgerow plants, my native shrubs in bare root form from the Niagara County Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm assuming if Niagara County has a plant and tree program, that every county has one. I know that New York State has one. I have not gotten 2,000, but I have bought hundreds for like less than $2 a plant, close to $1 a plant. And that's a really good resource to you. And they grow pretty fast. It takes a couple seasons, but it's definitely worth rather than buying like full-size plants.
Definitely, it's worth checking, like look at your county first, but also check surrounding counties, because some of them have things like I can't remember one county or another county. One of them had 9 bark and the other one didn't. And so choose, and they won't.
Can you buy from other counties? Because for Niagara, you have to be a resident.
Oh, I guess that might just be from county to county.
Yeah, because I used to live in Buffalo, and I wouldn't have been able to get from Niagara County.
I think some of them also get them all from the Saratoga Tree Nursery, and so you can buy directly from them.
Okay.
But sometimes you have to get on it quick because they sell out of stuff too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's a really good tip. Thanks, Betsy.
Let me look for a link. I'll put a link in the chat for Saratoga.
Thank you. Yeah. So let's see what else. Yeah. So the print version, we're sharing the presentations, right, Carla?
Everyone who registered, I'll have your email
Yeah.
address. I'm actually traveling right now, but when I'm back tomorrow, I'll send you guys a follow-up that has those slideshows, providing my lovely presenters send me copies.
Yeah, we will. We promise.
Oh,
Thought you stepped out to collect bobcat yarn. Oh, that's funny. Okay, what is hardware cloth? So hardware cloth is like it's a mesh that's comes in a roll, and it's similar to chicken wire, but it has like very rigid square mesh. It's like sturdier, and the mesh is a lot smaller than chicken wire. So that's what hardware cloth is. You can buy it on Amazon. Don't buy it on Amazon, but you can buy it at Tractor Supply or a local feed store somewhere. And let's see, any advice on prairie dogs? Do we have prairie dogs? I don't know.
They might be somewhere that does.
I don't know. I mean, they are burrowing animals similar to voles. I'd probably say all the same things for prairie dogs that I say about voles, but I literally don't know. I thought that those were like a foreign animal. What do I know? I've seen them at the zoo. Okay, so are dahlias best watered overhead? No. I mean, I think that most people probably use drip irrigation, which is what I've always done. But out of desperation this year and the drought, I had to get water on my dahlias somehow because I was too busy to install drip irrigation this year, which sounds crazy, but that was just my life. So I put sprinklers out. It worked amazing. It also watered all the weeds. So there's that. But I learned that spider mites hate wet conditions, and spider mites were really bad this year because we had a drought. So, I think there's a give and take, and I think it's always worth trying. So I love all your comments. This is so nice. The blue globe is a new one for Johnny's. Is it here a downside to having a thistle? Are you talking about the globe thistle that I have in this picture? I'm assuming that. That's actually not like a native perennial or anything. I just love that as a cut flower, and like it doesn't have thorns on it, so you can actually cut it, as opposed to thistle will obviously you can't sell that or touch it. It will kill your hands. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do not.
You can get them as plugs.
Yeah, you can get them as plugs too. So do you make your own compost? Do you use Jedam? So I make my own compost, but I don't nearly make enough of it to supply it for my farm. So I actually get compost trucked in from a livestock farm, and the guy that makes it is pretty mindful about how he makes it. He uses different types of animal manure that he collects around, and then he also mixes it with wood chips and leaves, and he actually monitors the temperature and maintains it. And he's made mention to me that he tries not to keep it too hot for the beneficial bacteria or whatever. So I trust the compost that I'm using. I ordered 60 tons of compost this year. There's no way I could possibly produce that much. Also because I keep most of my waste in the field. Remember we talked about that? So there's not really that much left over for me to compost. Jedam is a Korean natural farming component of regenerative farming. I do some of that, but that's a whole other topic that, I do some of that, but there's so many different facets of it that, I would say what I mostly do from that is create my own biological amendments. And I would look into Nigel Palmer's book on the resources for that. Has anyone ever struggled with winter cutworms? Apparently they're becoming more prevalent in high tunnels. I fall planted a bunch of different flowers and overwinter them in low tunnels, and I've noticed the worms in both areas. How would you manage cutworms naturally in the winter? Any advice?
Oops, sorry, I was just looking that up because I hadn't heard of
Yeah,
them.
what do you think?
They certainly seem to be, there's lots of information out there on them. And if you want something naturally, earlier on in the discussion, someone said using dipel, which Bacillus thuringiensis, which will work. I mean, going out at night and collecting them, you have to do it like put your headlamp on and go out late because they're not visible other than at night when they're feeding on your plants.
Right.
Other problems you could put plant collars on, but again, it's a lot of work. I don't know. So it's something I hadn't heard of. So I'm looking it up and seeing what I can find.
Yeah. That's a good question. I would try to, like think about what eats cutworms, like ground beetles or wolf spiders. Woo, gross. I hate them.
The big problem too is what else is active when it's cold. Yeah, broken eggshells I've heard about for, it's like using diatomaceous earth or anything that cuts them around the plants. What does feed on them?
Diatomaceous earth would definitely kill them. I don't know what else is active that you wouldn't want to kill with diatomaceous earth, but I would say if you sprinkle that around your plants and on your plants, it would definitely kill them. That's a good point. Wireworms, same thing. I mean, I have wireworms in my dahlia patch, but it's not bad enough to where I'm like super concerned about it. If I see a couple wireworms here and there, it doesn't freak me out. I guess I just don't know what, like, do you have like a crazy wireworm infestation? I don't know. Best sources for seeds beyond Johnny's. So I order from a lot of seeds from GeoSeed because it's typically in larger quantities and it costs less. They don't have a lot of organic seed though. So there's also Fruition Seeds, which is a local company. And Select Seeds is great. I used to order a lot from Baker Creek, but I don't anymore because I don't know. They don't have the greatest selection for cut flowers, in my opinion. If anybody else has great, seed resources, can you please? Yeah, Harris. Okay, also Harris. Put them in the chat, please. Thanks.
Sunflower Selections is really affordable for sunflowers.
Oh, nice. I actually don't grow sunflowers, but it's really good to know. Best sources for plugs. So it depends on what you're looking for. I use Farmer Bailey. He's a broker for Grow and Sell, mostly for annuals. And I also get my perennial shrubs from Spring Meadows Nursery. They're in Michigan. Unfortunately, they're shipped kind of far. I get a lot of beautiful plugs from North Creek Nurseries, which is just below us in Pennsylvania. They sell a lot of native perennials. There's also a place, what's it called? I get emails from them all the time. Sorry, one second. New Moon Nursery. They have tons of native perennial plugs. So I'll put those in the chat before we sign off here. Okay, what am I doing? Sorry. Let's see. Did you lose my screen?
We've got your email up.
Oh, hi. Oh my gosh, Fran. Sorry, I was really nerdy.
First, right?
Yeah, I'm like trying to get back to the chat here. Why do I feel like I don't know how to use technology? Come on.
So we've got your slideshow back up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get back to the chat. Okay, here we go. Chat. Let's see. Okay. Pros and cons for mushroom compost. I have not used mushroom compost straight. I don't know, honestly. Let's see. If anyone has any, if I were to use mushroom compost, I might use it as like a mixture with my other compost. I don't see any problem with it though. It sounds like it probably is really good fungal, if it's made correctly. The thing about compost is you have to be aware of what you're using, because whatever's in the compost you're going to be introducing into your farm, which for me in terms of weed seeds has been a serious issue. So it's really important to know what you're working with. Plant collars. Do you want to, Betsy, can you speak about plant collars?
Yeah, I put a note in there. I mean, I've seen them done with metal. I've seen them done with other things. It's anything that prevents the cutworm from reaching the stem. So, I've even seen, I think, paper ones. You don't want something that doesn't work, like little wax cups or something. You don't want something to break down too fast. But I mean, the concept of going and putting a little collar around each stem seems somewhat overwhelming to me. But they were asking in general too about winter IPM, and some of the same things apply in terms of cultural control and so forth. Winter biological control in high tunnels is tough because most of the biological controls that we have don't like it that cold. They've gone into their dormancy and their hibernation or diapause or whatever, so they're just not around. I'd be interested. I don't know. I mean, I assume the same of ground beetles and so forth, but they have a lower temperature tolerance than some things do. Ladybugs have a little bit better tolerance, but not really enough. And there are other issues with ladybugs as well. So that it is one of the things that I think we don't have very good handles on in terms of how to do biological control, in particular in a cooler winter greenhouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't even grow undercover. I'm erecting a hoop house next year, so sorry, I can't speak on that. Okay, I think we
remember correctly that you grow roses.
Me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you tell us some of your experiences with those? Because it just seems like that's a complicated thing. And how do you
yeah. So I've had what I've noticed is every year the roses have been different. I also had a unique experience where voles ate my roses, chewed on the roots and the tops of the plants. So that really messed up their growth. But my understanding of roses is that they grow best under a tunnel in our climate. We should be choosing varieties that are more resistant to cold and disease to begin with. Most of the roses I have are David Austin roses, the really nice English garden roses. And I don't have them covered with a low tunnel, but I think building a low tunnel over them, if they're planted in a row, would be ideal, or heavily mulching them in the winter with wood chips, because they really, I don't know, they don't do well in super cold conditions, and we never know what's going to happen in the winter.
There are some nice Canadian varieties that are really much more cold tolerant, but again, are they the kinds that, I'm trying to think of the series, but are they the kinds that people want? And that's another whole issue of, I like your comment about if it doesn't work for you, don't grow it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so it's find the ones that work. So maybe everybody's I had someone I was talking to, they're like, well, nobody grows lilies because they say people don't want them. I'm like, I don't understand that. I think lilies would be great to have in cut flower bouquets and so forth. But, but she said, but she can grow well, and she has some people that want them. So again, if you need to sort of balance that, what do people want with what actually grows well for you? And maybe you don't have cafe au lait dahlias, but you have something that's just as pretty in the same sort of color range, or, whatever. Since that's the one I hear about all the time.
Yeah.
Cafe au lait is a diva.
That's what I actually...
It's also kind of a pain in the butt, right?
No, I don't know. No, I don't have a problem with cafe au lait.
Right.
I don't know. I grow hundreds of them, and they're so beautiful. But they are I guess the first dahlia that if bug. Like I noticed the cucumber beetles on them this year where I am, and they were kind of eating the petals. But again, I still use them even if there's chewing in the petals. So one more thing about the roses. I purchased roses this year from Spring Meadow Nursery, which they're basically I don't know if broker is the right term, but they sell proven winners plants, which are all those hybridized, landscape plants. I bought like 3 different types of proven winners roses because, and like one of them I've seen in like a local landscaped parking lot area where there's a lot of traffic. It's just exposed to the elements in like the worst way. And those flowers are so beautiful. So I'm really excited to see how those roses do. The one that I'm particularly excited about is called At Last. It's a peach kind of gardeny looking rose by Proven Winners, and I just bought them in bulk. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not opposed to buying hybridized plants. Again, I think it's important to incorporate as many natives as we can to, do the whole biodiversity thing. So
I just found an article on the sort of the history of that Canadian rose breeding program, and it has some of the varieties listed. They were selected for hardiness and disease resistance. So
yeah,
both good things.
Cool. I'll have to look into those. Love it.
Well, this was so much fun, you guys. I love all the expertise here and the wonderful comments. And I do want to plug, if there's not any more questions, let's see, I want to go ahead and plug our upcoming programs. So we're going to skip next week because of Turkey Day. But we do have a lot more in store for you. And in fact, on December 1st, we've got crop planning with Jenny Marks from Trademarks Flower Farm. She's put a ton of time and energy into creating tools and really thinking out the crop planning process, which, in my case, there's always a limiting factor for every flower farmer. And for me, it's greenhouse space. I can start all the seeds in the world, but then when it comes time to give them a home, like right there at that one part of the season, I'm in trouble. So just really getting you thinking about how to plan. And as a special bonus for folks who attend, if you submit a crop plan, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we will send you a seed collection. So just a little bit of motivation to get it done before you get into the real busy season. And then we have upcoming sessions on soil health. Fran actually gave us a great introduction to that today. Climate smart farming, very important. Season extension, which kind of ties in with the climate smart. And then at the first of the year, we're going to have one on wholesaling. We started talking it's called ins and outs because it's both the buying and the selling. And we already discussed some of those sources today of where you can buy things wholesale, which is very important when you're trying to make a profit.
So Carla, people are apparently having trouble with the last session, that it seems to take them back to the season extension one. So the link is.
I think I just misnamed it. So if you sign up for that last session, I will change the name on that registration. I was doing a lot of copy and pasting that day. So, and then we don't have it fully scheduled and marketed yet, but then in the January and February, we're going to do a whole series on marketing risk. And we would very much like to have Fran back to talk about some of the other ways that, beyond what she does. I saw this one amazing in-person talk she gave, and she talked about how she markets her DIY events, and this girl does everything.
Thank you. I would love to.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
It's interesting because pricing is a big deal, and that's the one thing that we've been hearing about people, and it's a fascinating conversation. It's not even something that I work on, but I've been involved in some of the conversations, and everybody has kind of a different idea.
Yeah. And we tend to undersell ourselves all the time. Yeah. And we have to work together to not do that.
And I like to see people who haven't gotten their land yet, but are starting to gather information. That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Well,
taking all the right steps.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you all again so much, and I hope to see you back here after the holiday.
Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank
you.
you, Fran.
Bye.
Okay, Carla, I just sent you my slides.
Okay, great. And I'm trying to end the meeting, but I always have trouble with that.